Welcome back, everybody, and today we're going to be finishing up this chapter as we take a look at equity theory. Now, so far we've taken a look at several important and fundamental theories when it comes to motivation. Today we're going to take a look at another aspect of it, which deals with people's perception of equal treatment. Now, I want you to remember when it comes to this theory that we're going to be looking at, equity theory, there are legal implications that arise as a result of this theory. For instance, if a person feels that he or she is not being treated fairly or with equity, many times they may sue the company, especially when it comes to discrimination and unfair treatment. So this one equity theory has a lot of practical implications as well as theoretical implications. And I'm going to be talking about that a little bit more as we go into the video. So let's go ahead and start today with the final section of motivation and dealing with equity theory. Well, welcome back, everybody, and today we're going to be finishing up Chapter 8 as we take a look at one of the last few major theories of motivation, and that's called equity theory. Now, equity theory, folks, it's very important that you understand this, not just from a theoretical standpoint, but from a practical standpoint. Equity theory, when you think about it and once you understand it, you come to realize that it is really why people sue companies, why there's so many discrimination and unfair labor practice suits and complaints today. It's all related to the idea of equity. Now, equity theory is a theory that proposes that people are motivated to seek social equity in the rewards they receive for their performance. In other words, I want to make sure that what I am doing and the company is rewarding me in relation and in proportion to what I'm doing. And I'm also concerned about what the other person is getting in relation to what I'm getting. If we're doing the same job, I want to know that the company is not giving more rewards out to that other person than they are to me. Let's say, for instance, you are on an assembly line and the person next to you does the same job. You are part of a continuum of manufacturing, and you do relatively equal work for what you perceive to be equal pay. But what if you found out that the person next to you is making, let's say, $2 an hour more than what you're making? Well, equity theory says that you're going to be upset over all of that, that you're going to perceive that there's an inequity. Why does this person get more pay than me for what we're actually doing, because we're doing the same thing? So if you feel that there is inequity, now you can do several things as a result. You can slack off, which means your motivation will wane, or you could file a charge against the employer for discrimination or for unfair labor practices. You could cause disruption and conflict in the company because of the way that you perceive that you were treated. And if it was unfairly, then you can incite other people to complain, and you can have a strike. You can have companies who will organize labor, and that's happened in the past, where they get unions in there to kind of equal the playing field and give you more of what you think you should be getting as far as your output is concerned. So there are all types of negative results if a person feels that they're not being treated equally. And really what this theory entails is that if my outputs do not equal my inputs in relation to other people, then inequity exists. If I feel that I'm doing the same work that another person is doing and I'm not getting, as a result, an input from the company that's proportionate to the other person, then that's going to affect my morale, that's going to affect my productivity, and chances are any number of one of those results can occur. Now, another important thing about equity is that it really doesn't matter if true inequity exists. As long as it is perceived that there is inequity, that's when you have problems. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, let's say, for instance, that other person who is making $2 more an hour, let's say that person has a degree and you don't. Maybe that person comes to the company with more experience than you do. Maybe that person is a manager in training and they have to perform the work of an assembly line worker so that they can better manage once they attain that qualification. So in that case, that would bring to light things that the individual was not aware of and jump to conclusions over. This is where we get in trouble. It's not that inequity exists, it's the perception of inequity. This is why most companies forbid you to talk about salaries or your compensation package. It's to avoid these things. But it doesn't make a difference if there is actual inequity or not. If there is the perception of that, then you can get in trouble. And that's very hard to manage. You can be above board on everything, but if people perceive that you are treating them unequally, then the damage is already done. So equity theory is a big issue in companies today, especially when you're dealing with diversity and you're dealing with different people groups and cultures and all of that stuff. So just know it and understand the implications of it and how it can happen within your organization. Now, empowerment. Empowerment is power sharing. It's the delegation of power or authority to subordinates in the organization. Empowerment is a fairly new concept and practice in management because in the past, if you remember, if you've taken Intro to Business and some of these broader concept courses, you'll realize that in the past, empowerment was unheard of. You had the responsibility of just following your supervisor's orders. They did not try to solicit your input on anything. It was believed that the boss or the supervisor or the manager knew what was best in every situation. Their job was to lead, your job was to follow. So for you to be able to take responsibility for your own actions and direct the way that the work would be conducted, that was not something that was practiced really until we get into the 50s and 60s. Now, a guy named Edward Deming tried to introduce what was called, or what we know today as, total quality management. And he introduced it to the American worker, and empowerment was one of those key elements in TQM, or total quality management. And they laughed him out of the out of their offices. They said, "You got to be crazy. This is not how we do business. The workers work, the leaders lead." So he didn't get a warm reception when he introduced empowerment to American culture. After World War II, he moved to Japan, and in their restructuring, Deming provided the guidance in teaching the people there about TQM. The people embraced it, and today the Japanese consider Deming one of their top idols when it comes to management and leadership and just really taking people and utilizing them to the best of their ability. We have started to come along with that, but we still have a problem with empowerment. Empowerment means I give you total freedom. That also includes the freedom to fail. Now, this is where American culture is kind of leery and where they stop short. We'll give you power and authority as long as you succeed. but if you start failing, we're going to remove you. So that really takes the wind out of the sails of a lot of people. They're going to be very conservative. They're going to be very reserved. And in today's world with globalization and technology, you really can't afford to be that way. You have to be out in the front. You have to be the innovator. You have to be the creator and so forth. But empowerment encourages that. And the idea is that if you have the freedom to fail, you are going to be bolder. You're going to be more assertive, and you are going to be more innovative because you're going to not fear failure and maybe losing your job and all of that. The Japanese, this is why they were so successful with it. Now with us, we're, I believe, making strides, but we still have in our collective psyche the idea that your leadership is going to be based on, and your tenure in leadership is going to be based on how successful you are. If you fail, then you may not be around very long. So empowerment is just delegating the power of authority to your subordinates. And in learning organizations, this is a very big deal because it takes that innovation and creativity of all people to be able to make many of these 21st century companies work and be successful. Now, there's a psychological aspect to empowerment. And before you empower employees, you're going to give them information about company performance. They're going to receive knowledge and skills to contribute to those goals. And employees have the power to make substantive decisions, not just so-and-so can come in on the weekends and we'll alter the schedules and this, that, and the other. I'm talking about substantive changes. We need to change the design of this work process or this workflow. That would be a very big change. Or we need to change the dynamics of what we're doing here as far as how the employees perform their jobs. These are substantive changes. These are changes that have teeth to them. Also, employees understand the meaning and impact of their jobs. You know, I can talk to some of my students who work in the professional world, and I can ask them, what do you do for your company? How does your job impact the overall performance of your organization? And many are not able to tell me anything. We don't know. We just come in, we do our job, we go home. They're not engaged, they're not involved, and oftentimes their motivation is a reflection of how that company communicates with them. They don't know anything, so they're not motivated to do anything. So other than just what they're required to do. So communicating the meaning and how that job impacts that organization is important. And employees are rewarded based on company performance. Now, this is what the Japanese do. If the company is successful, everybody's successful. If the company is not performing well, then the employees are not going to be compensated well. In fact, there was a steel mill in Pittsburgh, or in Pennsylvania, and their whole compensation model was built on that. They didn't give benefits. They didn't give salaries. Their salaries were not set. They got paid in relation to how well the company was performing. And if the company was doing well, then everybody shared in the wealth. It made no difference if you were an executive or CEO or the lowest worker in that steel factory. You were paid based on your performance. You received bonuses based on your performance. And if the company did bad, then whatever percentage they were lacking in productivity, the majority of the percentage would be borne by the top executives. They would take the greatest decrease in pay, and then it went all the way down to the lowest individual. So everything was fair and above board, but they were paid based on the company's performance. Now talk about motivation. When you're in control of your destiny, your pay, your bonuses, that could do a whole lot for motivation. And what better motivation could there be than for everybody to be able to glean the benefits of a good performing organization? So these are some of the psychological preparations that need to be made before you empower somebody. Now, from the psychological end, you'd have to also design jobs for empowerment. Now, job design is structuring jobs in a way to meet higher level needs and increase motivation toward the accomplishments of goals. So when you're designing the job, and HR will be a big asset to you, a great asset to you in assisting you in job design. In fact, I teach that in HR. Job design is where you take a look at whatever you're doing, whether it's a product or a service, and you look at all of the components that are going to be necessary to get to the end result, which is producing that product or that service. And then you design the jobs that it will take for it to be accomplished. Now, you also have the job characteristics model, and that's a model of job design that considers the core job dimensions of skill variety, task identity, task significance, autonomy, and feedback to enrich jobs and increase their motivational potentials. So the characteristics of the job will include what functions are necessary for me to complete this job. And if you're like on an assembly line, each station along that assembly line has to have well thought out design protocol so that when that product gets to you, you know exactly all of the functions and characteristics that will make successful that part of the production process. And whether or not you can work alone or not in the function of that needs to be decided. What variety of skills are going to be needed for you to be able to accomplish each and every task that's going to be required for that product to be made. So these are the job characteristics of empowerment. And then job enrichment. That's the motivational approach. The psychological approach that incorporates high-level motivators. And if you remember from the very beginning, when we talked about in this chapter the hierarchy of needs model, we start out with our basic survival needs, but that's not going to be good enough to motivate us. We're going to be motivated towards more feeling-oriented or affect dimensions of work and more esteem and psychological fulfillment. That's what we're shooting for, and these are those high-level motivators, and that can include job responsibility, recognition, and opportunities for growth, learning, and achievement. Now, you've probably noticed that with these models, a lot of them say pretty much similar things, and that's true. They just vary in the way that they present their models. But essentially, you can't just think paying a person and telling them to do a job is all that's going to be required of you. You're going to have to find out what motivates these people. What are those higher level accomplishments that they want to achieve, and be able to produce a work environment that's going to be conducive to that. Now, here's the job characteristics model as far as a pictorial diagram of it goes, and I'll let you guys take a look at that. But essentially, you have the core job dimensions, which is what we just talked about: variety, identity, significance, autonomy, and then also feedback. Those critical psychological states that result from the core job dimensions, whether the work is meaningful or not, whether they feel that they are responsible for the outcomes, whether or not they are being told about where they fit in and how their output affects the organization. All of these are those psychological states. And then the personal and work outcomes, you either have high quality or low quality. in satisfaction or motivation and performance. If not, then you're going to see turnover and you're going to see absenteeism. So if you're losing a lot of people, chances are these other dimensions are not being fulfilled, and as a result, they're leaving. Now, job enrichment, you have several suggestions for that. They say increase skill variety, which means that you can do different things. Now, some people, if they're required to do different things, they're going to want more money. So you have to be careful with that. You can structure jobs so that an employee can perform a task from beginning to end. You can incorporate task significance into the job, give people autonomy for choosing how and when they're going to perform these tasks, and to the extent possible, design jobs to provide feedback and let employees see the outcomes of their efforts. What I try to do, especially in ministry as a pastor, I try to encourage my ministers to be creative, to embrace that ministry as theirs, and it is theirs. If God called them to it, then they are going to need to be responsible in those areas. I don't micromanage. I give them autonomy. I give them the ability to perform whatever it is in ministry that they're called to do from the beginning to the end. I give input and suggestions, and normally, without fail, they've been able to step up to the plate, and they seem to appreciate that more than being micromanaged. So they feel that they are trusted, and they are, until they give me a reason not to trust them, and they haven't done that yet. But to be able to enrich the person through their work is an important undertaking that takes some doing on your part. But once you have done that, you're going to have motivated and productive employees. Now, some of the empowerment applications, dimensions used to classify these methods, and that's the extent to which employees are involved in defining desired outcomes and the extent to which they participate in determining how to achieve these outcomes. And we see here in this slide pretty much a model of that. In the upper left hand, you have high participation, low degree of determining how to achieve the outcomes, and you see as a result the orange, empowered to define mission and set goals. You see at the bottom of that, no empowerment, where both are low. You see in the upper right, self-management. They both define the mission and goals and define the tasks and processes. And then you also see here empowered in the blue to define tasks and work processes as well. So these are just some of the different dimensions of empowerment. And of course, you want the high and high quadrant, which is the green, where they can define what it is that they're all about and the tasks and processes to make that come to fruition. Engagement is what we want out of the employee or minister, and that's when people enjoy their jobs, are satisfied with their conditions, work conditions, contribute enthusiastically to meet team goals and organizational goals, and feel a sense of belonging and commitment to the organization. Now, these are the challenges, though, that will present itself in trying to produce engagement. We live in a disconnected society. It's a technology-oriented society today. So that camaraderie and that cohesion may or not be present in many organizations today. You have people who are scattered out abroad. They may not even work in the same country. That can drastically affect the amount of engagement. And then there are some today who just distrust organizations. They come to work and they're not going to do any more than what they can get away with. So you have several challenges, but the idea is to engage them so that when they're there, they're not just counting down the hours, punching in and out a time clock, They are actually there to do work, to be involved, to make the company thrive. And that's the end goal for most all leaders. Now, our last slide talks about new ideas for motivation. You have the making progress principle, and that's the idea that the single most important factor that can boost motivation, emotions, and perceptions during a workday is making progress towards meaningful goals. And that goes along with what we call goal theory, which says that organizations exist to reach goals. And if you are constantly working towards goals, that keeps you occupied, that keeps you engaged, and that's a good model to go by. You also have thriving workforce, and that's where the people are not just satisfied and productive, but also engaged in creating a better future for themselves and the organization. And as you see in the slide, it incorporates vitality and learning. This is where you are investing in the worker. And in learning organizations, that's what we're seeing a lot of today. Organizations investing in people. And it's believed that if we invest in people, people see that, and in return, they want to see the company thrive. Doesn't work in every situation. But the more you invest in the person, the more trust that you display or show with those individuals, the more likely they're going to be motivated to go perform and to increase their performance and efficiency and also their effectiveness in the organization. As we close out this chapter, we took a look at equity theory and how important it is. We also took a look at empowerment. And folks, I can tell you, when it comes to motivation, people are watching each other, and they are going to evaluate whether or not they are being treated fairly in relation to others. And also, too, this idea of empowerment, as we start to emerge into what we call learning organizations, empowerment is a key element in that. So take these theories, and learn them, understand the importance and implications of them, and whether it be in ministry or in business, you'll do well. Have a good day, and we'll see you next week.